Good evening and welcome to Capitol Report here on WCMU Public Television. I'm David Nicholas and pleased to welcome back to our program Democratic Representative Vanessa Guerra from Bridgeport Township. She's serving in her third term for the 95th District. That includes the cities of Saginaw and Zilwaukee, along with 7 townships in Saginaw County. Under present circumstances, Representative Guerra joins us today via Skype. Good to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. I hope you, your family, and staff are all well. We are speaking on a Friday afternoon, and I wonder if you could give us the latest as you understand it in terms of statewide directives, executive orders, and so forth from Governor Gretchen Whitmer's office.
Yeah, so things have been changing by the day, if not by the hour. The one thing that I've really been trying to put out there is the state's website with all of the latest coverage of coronavirus, both the number of cases we have, where they're at, along with the executive orders, because again, those are coming out almost daily now, sometimes twice a day. So the most present update or guidance that we have is that many of our local businesses have been asked to close. Those restaurants that are still open, of course, are being asked to only serve takeout. And anything over 50 is over 50 people is prohibited. But of course, I've also been very open with people that the CDC guidance is 10 people. So, if you can avoid those sorts of gatherings, definitely do that. But for all of the most up-to-date information, it's visit the state website, www.michigan.gov/coronavirus.
The status in your district with regards to the overall health, any confirmed cases or the testing process right now in District 95?
Sure. As of today, we don't have any confirmed. Of course, the day is not through yet. But I've also been very open with people that part of that is that we don't have the testing available. And so one of the things is that there's probably absolutely people that have it, and I'm telling people to operate as though we have it here in Saginaw County. But because we don't have enough tests, we haven't had a confirmed case yet. And so currently people are asked to go to the hospital if they are exhibiting signs, shortness of breath, and those sorts of emergent situations. We ask them to call the hospital or go to the hospital. But if you're don't have those symptoms quite yet, to call your healthcare provider and ask them what they should do.
The status of the healthcare providers in your district regards to their health in general, the supply needs for the hospitals, whether we're talking masks or ventilators and the like, how are they faring so far?
We're low on supplies. Everybody across the state is. One of the executive orders recently put out was creating a system where people who have supplies and people who need supplies can better communicate. Because if you have an overabundance, we want to make sure that we're able to get it to those communities that don't. And certainly with federal dollars that are now finally coming down, we're able to utilize those dollars more. The governor also asked to initiate the Michigan National Guard, which will utilize them to then take the masks and gloves and respirators to the facilities that need them. But our facilities are running low, and that's part of, unfortunately, this pandemic is that there's a great need and not enough resources to go around just yet. But I have faith that our state and federal government are actively working to solve that problem.
You mentioned the actions so far taken by the governor's office. Have your local officials seen any need, or are they potentially looking at any further actions that they may need to take locally to better enforce the elements of trying to contain this and maintaining social distancing and the like?
Sure. I think that a lot of our county public health resources are looking at what other counties are doing. I believe in Wayne County at the Beaumont Hospital, they are now just starting to get sort of that drive-through testing started so that people aren't having to come in and sit in a room with a bunch of other sick people, potentially contaminating each other. And so I expect that we'll get to that point. Again, it's just a matter of resources and people working around the clock to get us there. But it's sort of, looking at what other people are doing, how is that working, and looking also at what other states have done and what other countries have done who have dealt with this sooner than we have, and trying to mirror the good things that have been successful for them, and avoiding the sort of traps that they fell into that were less successful. And so we're hoping to get to the point drive-by testing. We're not there just yet, but we're close to it.
Schools have been out of session or are out of session now for 2 weeks prior to the scheduled spring break for most of the state. How prepared were the teachers in your district to transition to some form of distance learning and keep up with studies for their students?
Sure. That has been a huge problem in terms of the distance learning because I think it speaks to the fact that in this day and age, people assume everyone has internet access, and that's just not the case. Whether you're a rural community who struggles to actually have the utility out there reach your home, or if you live in a more urban community, you might not have the funds to pay for internet access. And now there have been internet providers that have provided low cost or no fee to individuals during this time, which has been wonderful. But some of my districts, they did the survey where they sent out to parents and asked them who has regular internet access. I mean, and oftentimes they're not even meeting 50% of their student population. Some districts have been able to, and that's wonderful. But the distance learning has been difficult for many districts, particularly low-income districts. But in terms of one thing that they have been able to do very successfully is the food distribution. So all of the schools in my district have by Friday, the day after the notice came out that they would be shut down by 5 p.m. They all had plans in place to make sure that the kids were fed, and not just for the week long time, but also for the weekend. So today being Friday, the first weekend we're really going into this, they have meals that they're giving for Saturday and Sunday as well. And so they have been absolutely amazing in my district, and I'm sure in other districts as well, in ensuring that their kids are fed, and that they're able to kind of see. Some of them are taking their buses to the bus stop, so it's kind of nice to see the kids and let them know that we have their backs, and we're going to do whatever we can to make sure that they're fed and that they're educated. That piece is harder though.
Is that the expectation for, as we speak today, the next subsequent week and then into the spring break period? And obviously, we're in an uncertain status regarding schools and whether or not they'll be open beyond the scheduled spring break. We haven't heard an update on that yet. But is it right now the expectation that they'll be able to meet those meal needs? And are the districts educationally anticipating getting closer to being able to put in place some form of distant learning for this week and maybe even kind of extending it into that spring break time?
Yeah, so as I said, the food piece, the meal piece was a little bit easier. And so they are expected to go into next week as well. All of my school districts, they have the days and the times and locations already posted for next week, distributing meals. And now I'm starting to see more of them sort of find creative ways to get the interactive education piece going, especially because, as I mentioned, some internet providers are now offering that service for free, really pushing out that information to their students in the hopes that they can get some sort of tele-learning process going. And so that was kind of secondary to the meal piece because we've got to make sure our kids are fed first and foremost. But now I'm seeing that, yes, more of them are figuring out, okay, now how do we get back into learning? Because these kids have now had 1 week where it's been sort of hectic and crazy for them. And the more routine that we can bring to young kids, the better they can be at ease. And then once they come back to school, they're ready to go.
We do have a precedent under a state of emergency in which Michigan finds itself now, is declared by the governor's office from last year, where we had a certain number of the snow days that did not count against the schools because of the extreme weather conditions. This year, a much more mild winter. Most of the districts, I'm guessing, have not come anywhere near to using up their allotments. So when we start looking at the calendar, some days could wind up waived, but what's the expectation or projection when it comes to that school calendar as we move forward?
Yeah, so we were in Lansing on Tuesday, which would have been the 17th, and we were thinking that we were going to address that piece of this puzzle that day. Unfortunately, negotiations broke down. And so what my understanding is, the concern is because we don't know for sure, is this only 2 weeks? Is it more than 2 weeks? Some of the opposition has been, well, let's not, change the law and say we give them these 2 weeks off and then we have to come back and change it again. Which my response to that has been, these educators and these administrators, they need notice now. They need to know what their plan is going to be, because it's not like we can't come back and change it and extend it if we need to. And so they need some certainty and some affirmation from the state that we're going to cover those days. Don't worry about that piece. And so the expectation now is that by Wednesday of next week, when I return to Lansing, that'll be the top priority that we address. And I'm hopeful at that point that they've heard from enough educators that they know that this has to be addressed now.
To the economic side, once again, and you did mention some of the status with the restaurants and some of the smaller businesses. Overall, what are we looking at from small or large employers, those that have had to limit hours or completely close? We've heard about the extension, not only health benefits, but also for unemployment benefits. And as we're kind of looking at this in several different moving pieces, economically, what's the good news and what are the areas of concern within District 95?
Yeah, so the good news, of course, is the executive order expanded the reasons why someone might access unemployment, that being that they are sick themselves. So if they didn't previously have paid time off, this is obviously very helpful for them. Or if they're caring for a loved one or even a child who is now home. And so that's the good news. The piece that we're very concerned about in the 95th District is that we have plenty of people who don't qualify for unemployment under the basic rules of unemployment because they didn't make enough the year prior. And so maybe they had taken time off because of a family issue, or maybe they were a young person who just wasn't working yet. And now they go to apply and they're denied because they don't meet the basic qualifications. That is a huge issue in my district right now. My Facebook and my email are flooded with that question. And so for me, my push is going to be, what do we do for those people that don't currently qualify? The one glimmer of hope I'm sort of telling people is that everybody's in this boat. And so truthfully, the government can't afford not to do something about it because there's going to be thousands and thousands of Michiganders in that same boat across the state.
Sitting down today, the Trump administration in their latest briefing and the news, continuing news from Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, the plan on Congress on a relief package could bring payments of $1,000 or more to each person over 18. Pending the scope of the federal action, has anything been discussed with the legislature and the governor's office about what other intervening efforts financially that may be taken?
Sure. So there's a number of different pieces that have been executed by executive order already. So I know the Treasury Department has postponed the deadline for certain taxes that small businesses have to pay. Foreclosures have been put on pause for now because obviously we'll want people to use the limited resources that they have, the limited income that they have to be able to do things like pay for food and resources that they need during this time. And I expect many more to come forward. Some small business owners, their liquor license payment is coming due pretty soon here. And obviously they're not open to sell spirits and alcohol. And so we're trying to find out, what other sorts of moratoriums are going to be put in place. And again, I just tell people this is an unprecedented time. And I know that we don't have the answers as quickly as I would even like to have them, but we're getting there. And people should continue to reach out to the legislators because there may be things that we don't think of. And we can, pass that on to the governor's team to say, hey, this also needs to be looked at and be put on hold or a moratorium be put in place because people shouldn't be having to worry about their bills right now. They should be looking at, they're thinking about their health and safety foremost.
The administration also announced in the briefing today, the Friday that we're sitting down, that tax day is moved to July 15th. Do we know then the impact that could have, along with, as you said, the extension of the licenses being paid? What this does in terms of the revenue stream into Lansing and the ability of government to meet its obligations, and then we start encountering rainy day funds and those moving pieces. How do we sit budget-wise?
So because it was just announced today, obviously we don't know how much that will impact. Another piece that was important that was noted is that people can still file. So if you're expecting that you're going to get a return from the state or the federal government, that's going to, again, sort of drain on the resources that we have. But, people should still, if we owe them money, the state should absolutely be paying them. But it is going to impact how we do things moving forward. I mean, we're in the middle of the 2020-2021 budget. And so what we do and what we end up passing is going to have to be reflected in what happens to our revenues right now because of this crisis. And so, again, we don't have a lot of answers on how much that's going to constrain our budget moving forward, but we absolutely know that the revenues are obviously not coming in like they were, and so we're going to have to adjust. And truthfully, we're going to have to seek a lot of support from the federal government because this is just a problem that's so large that as a state, we can't handle it on our own. We need the federal government to step up and to continue to look out for all of our states.
Do we see any potential impact in state or local services, given, as we've referenced here, the lack of the revenues coming in? Is there any jeopardizing? I know at least in our local community they have suspended the curbside recycling. Trash pickup remained the same, but what are they telling you in your district as to the status of things like that?
Right. So for now, most all public services are still maintained. Our public transit is still operating. They have cut down the number of routes because they're not only is their staff sort of getting smaller as people begin to stay home, concerned about themselves and their loved ones, but also we want to limit it to the most important routes, right? So people getting to the grocery store, getting to the stores that they need to. So that has been impacted here in the 95th. Our trash pickup, fortunately, is still the same. But I think that we'll continue to hear updates from our local government. I know nearly all of my township and city offices have been closed to the public. And so people are still working offline, so you can still call. You can still utilize the services that they have online. Another thing we've done locally is to stop the water shutoffs, because again, people need to be focused on their health and well-being and not concerned about losing water during this time.
With a complete change to the landscape that we have seen, you did reference the work that was underway on a fiscal 21 budget. What work, at least in this unprecedented and very truncated first week, has gone on, or what is the plan for being able to work on other issues, pertinent upfront issues, aside from this, in Lansing as we move forward?
Yes, that is an ongoing topic. As you may know, there was a recent executive order that local governments now have the option to handle their business. I'm talking about boards and city councils and school boards through an electronic means, and so they no longer are required to meet in person. They are, of course, required to post publicly all of the information about when they'll be meeting online and offer an opportunity to the public to join that online conversation. That does not, however, apply to the Michigan legislature. And so the plan so far is that we'll be meeting at least one day a week as needed. And so the goal is to get as much done in that one day as we can because we're coming from all across the state. And so, and then they're putting this all in, it's a big room, but there's a lot of people in that big room. And so many of our colleagues are concerned about their own health. And they have been told that if they are immunocompromised or concerned or maybe taking care of someone who is, that they are not required and the absence won't be held against them. They'll be excused because, again, health and safety is at the forefront of all of our minds. But we're going to keep working because we know that the state, we're the representatives of the state. And there's some things that only we are going to be able to do as a legislative body. And, millions of Americans across the country are still going to work, and I'll still be going to work as long as I can to serve our state.
That said, the scheduled legislative recess would begin 1 week from today as we are sitting down. Is that still scheduled, or are we awaiting kind of a reset of the circumstances of where we are to make a decision in Lansing as to whether or not work needs to continue, or some of that work can be put on hold at least for a brief period of time?
Right. So I believe it is still in place. I wasn't going anywhere, so I haven't changed my plans. I'll still be around. But I imagine that if that it will be canceled, and again, will be called a session as needed because people are really encouraged not to travel right now anyways. So I imagine we'll all be hunkered down in our homes, but ready to go to Lansing and vote as asked to.
For you, Representative Guerra, as we look at these very extraordinary circumstances, what specific measures have you been working on, either as a sponsor or supporter, and as time allows, as we deal with the crisis at hand, the things that you're trying to continue working forward as we deal with this at the same time?
Yeah. So even before, some of in the early days being last week, we had bills that were already introduced to help those who are uninsured. Now, obviously, we know with the expansion of Healthy Michigan, many Michiganders are, but there are still those who are uninsured. And we want to make sure that they have the test cost for testing of coronavirus and any sort of wage loss that they may experience because of that covered, because, again, that's a vulnerable population. And we've also introduced legislation to really encourage local governments and municipalities to have these pandemic plans in place. I think that many of us have learned a hard lesson that, to expect the unexpected. We didn't have these sorts of plans in place. We're prepared for small closures of 2 to 3 days because of snow and freezing temps, but I think this 2-week closure has really rocked the world of a lot of organizations. And so setting up a fund and putting in requirements that people have a plan in place so that we're ready for if and when this next time happens.
And to that end, and we won't know until we see the wider scope and the results of tests, the availability of tests and so forth, for Michigan and the governor's office to assess where we are by that April 3rd sort of reevaluation point. But what sorts of plans, in terms of people trying to put these plans in place, are we looking at to deal with this perhaps for a longer period of time? We've seen other states that have already decided that schools are going to be fully closed, or distance learning is going to continue, and colleges staying with online classes. I mean, this is obviously in many different layers, from local communities to schools and so forth, could have an even longer lasting impact than we've seen so far.
Yeah, the governor, as of yesterday, was very clear that there are, any information that's coming out that says that we are going in lockdown fully for 2 weeks, unless you hear it from her office, that they are just rumors at this point. And to the, understanding the perspective of my constituents, they see all of these other states that are doing these lockdowns, hunkering in place orders. And so they're very confused, and they're concerned that we could be next. Now, some of them are very supportive of that idea because they understand, closing down the wave and ensuring that not as many people are infected. But some kind of want to know, do I go and stack up now? Don't I go and stack up? But as of now, that's not an order that has been issued. And so I'm just telling folks to be mindful. Don't leave your house unless you have to. But I think a lot of our local units of government or organizations, because they've been pushed to figure out how to deal with this in this short time span, they'll be able to continue utilizing these sort of electronic means of communications with folks in the meantime, in the event that this lasts longer than April 3rd.
Do you have a sense then overall that people are maintaining as optimistic a possible outlook on this? What in terms of whether or not people are at least trying to see the advantages of the preparation, the level of preparedness to date, reevaluating, resetting those plans, restructuring things moving forward? And are there any glaring areas of concern where, if we move beyond April 3rd, or even getting to that point, where some have told you we are at a limit right now, and this is going to be a real definite negative challenge getting through this?
Yeah, so locally, I guess two of my concerns would be the schools being able to continue to feed the students, because there are obviously people that are delivering this food, and as we find out that more people, potentially have the virus, that's going to lessen the amount of people that are able to distribute, because obviously we don't want to spread that to the children that we're then offering meals to. So that is one of my concerns about as this goes on longer. And additionally, just are we going to continue getting the support to pay for these meals from the federal government, because there's so many things that we need to pay for at this point. So that's one of the concerns locally. The other concern that I have is, at what point does public transit, are we asked to shut down public transit? Again, our public transit has been wonderful in terms of following the CDC guidelines and putting in measures in place to limit the possibility for contamination. But as those workers begin to feel less and less comfortable coming to work, understandably so, because they want to, be safe themselves, who's going to operate that system? And so those are kind of two things that I am concerned about locally as time goes on. But again, we're learning from this, and if there's any light in it, it's that we will be prepared for the next time that it happens, because there's always a next time. It's just unfortunate we didn't kind of have some idea of what we could have been doing sooner than this.
And for your specific level, the status then of, you mentioned the 1 day in session, the working status of your staff and support in Lansing, and also home offices and the like, in terms of how everyone's holding up, you, your family, everyone personally. We don't want to lose sight of that.
Yes, yeah, that's been a tough one. For myself, only because So all of our work, all of the events are canceled. So I'm able to do all my work online, but there's a lot more people home right now. So they're using Facebook a lot more. So kind of this constant flood of Facebook messages and comments, which I'm encouraging because I want them to come to a direct source, someone who has access to legitimate news sources. But it's hard for me to sort of step away from that because I feel so passionately about helping out my constituents during this time. And so I have to remind myself sometimes to take a breather as well.
Well, we appreciate you joining us during this very unsettled and unprecedented time. Our best to you, your legislative colleagues, and especially your constituents as we work through this together. Thank you as well, we should say, to our folks here in-house, Chris Ogazali, Sean Hosky, and Joe Kirkland, who made it possible for us to do this today. We certainly hope that you and yours will remain well, and thanks very much for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
We appreciate your time and attention. We've been speaking with Representative Vanessa Guerra of the 95th House District, currently in her third term serving that Saginaw area district. For all of us here at Capitol Report, again, our thanks to the folks in-house for being flexible, allowing us to stay in production for this week. We trust that will be in the case in the weeks to come. I'm David Nicholas. For all of us here, be well, and we'll talk again soon.